This is Myths and Sagas. In today's episode, we turn to a god of wind and storm whose authority shaped the course of Mesopotamian civilization itself. This is a god whose stern command and volatile wrath made him both feared and revered as the king of gods and men. His name was Enlil, and in the ancient world, that name meant supreme law and order of the universe. Enlil was worshipped over 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia. He was the patron deity of Nippur, a city that Sumerians regarded as a sacred center of divine authority rather than a political capital. At Nippur, Enlil's great temple was called the Ekur, meaning mountain house. Archaeologists have found that this sanctuary was rebuilt and restored many times on the same hallowed ground by successive kings, indicating continuous reverence for Enlil across many ages. Pilgrims, priests and rulers alike travelled to Nippur to honour Enlil and seek his favour. In fact, Sumerian rulers would proclaim that their right to rule was granted by Enlil at Nippur, underscoring how no mortal king could govern without this god's blessing. Enlil embodied the fundamental forces that upheld life, kingship, and order in the world. His name can be interpreted as Lord Wind or Lord Air, reflecting his association with the sky's breath. People felt his presence in every breeze and mighty gale. But Enlil's influence reached far beyond the wind. The Sumerians believed that without Enlil's active influence, their world would fall into chaos. Here are some of the key aspects and domains attributed to Enlil: wind, air, and storms. Enlil was the lord of the atmosphere, from the gentle winds that carry life's breath to the roaring storms that could devastate cities. The rains brought by his storms made the land fertile, while his tempests could also be expressions of anger. In essence, he commanded the weather and the very air that all creatures breathe. Fertility of the land. As a weather god, Enlil was crucial for agriculture. Timely rains and bountiful harvests were seen as signs of Enlil's favour, whereas droughts were a warning of his displeasure. Kingship and law. Enlil was the divine source of earthly authority. He was regarded as the cosmic king who bestowed the crown and scepter upon human rulers. No king could legitimize his reign without Enlil's consent. In Mesopotamian ideology, kingship descended from heaven at Enlil's city, Nippur. Enlil perfected the decrees of power, lordship, and princeship, meaning that he established the very laws and offices that structured society. Rulers frequently paid homage to Enlil, dedicating their victories and building projects to him, hoping to maintain his mandate, fate, and cosmic order. Perhaps most importantly, Enlil was believed to hold the Tablets of Destiny, or Tablets of Fate, sacred objects that granted him the power to decree the fates of gods and humans. By uttering a command, Enlil could determine the course of events. His word could not be altered by any other god. This made him the ultimate arbiter of destiny and cosmic order. The other gods themselves respected and feared Enlil's decisions. In Mesopotamian cosmology, Enlil occupied a central place in the divine family of the Anunnaki. By lineage, Enlil was of prestigious parentage. His father was Anu, the supreme god of the heavens, and his mother was Ki, the goddess of the earth. In one cosmological poem, it is Enlil who separates his sky father and earth mother, literally lifting heaven away from earth, to make space for life in between. Thus, from birth, Enlil embodied the union of heaven and earth and became the lord of the air that flows between them. Enlil's siblings included some of the other great gods of Sumer. One brother was Enki, whom we met previously, the god of wisdom and water, known for his cleverness and kindness. A sister, in some traditions, was Ninhursag, also called Ninmah or Ki, the great mother goddess of the mountains and fertile earth. Together, Anu, Enlil, and Enki formed a powerful triad. Anu as the overarching sky, Enlil as the executive power on earth, and Enki as the clever organizer of the depths. Enlil's consort was the goddess Ninlil. The stories of Enlil and Ninlil reveal much about his character, as we'll see shortly. With Ninlil, Enlil raised a brood of divine children. Chief among them was Nana Sin, the moon god. They also begot Ninurta, a mighty god of war and agriculture, often depicted as Enlil's champion and right-hand son. Some traditions add Ishkur, the storm god of rain, as Enlil's son, and even Inanna, goddess of love and war, as his daughter. The assembly of gods, the Anunnaki, convened under Enlil's leadership. In Sumerian prayers and inscriptions, he is often called Father Enlil, a title of both reverence and affection, indicating that even the gods looked to him as a fatherly figure. However, being the father figure also meant Enlil could be stern, imposing, and occasionally unpredictable, much like a strict patriarch. As we explore Enlil's myths, we'll see both sides of his personality, the harsh judge and the caring provider, the rebel lover and the lawgiver. Enlil's stories are fewer in number than some trickster gods, but they are monumental in impact, touching on creation, destruction, love, and cosmic justice. Enlil's personality in Mesopotamian myth is in many ways the foil to his brother Enki's. Where Enki is depicted as gentle and crafty, Enlil comes across as commanding, forceful, and sometimes explosively temperamental. People feared Enlil's wrath. When the winds howled and storms blackened the sky, they imagined the great god raging from his lofty throne. Enlil could punish without hesitation if the cosmic order was disturbed. Yet, despite this stern image, Enlil was not evil or wantonly cruel. The Sumerians also described him as benevolent and fatherly, watching over humanity and ultimately wanting their survival. In essence, Enlil was like a strict parent, quick to discipline, but doing so out of a belief in order and the greater good. He expected obedience and reverence, and when properly respected, he granted favors: protection of cities, plentiful rains, victory in battles, and the continuity of kingship. When disobeyed or angered, however, Enlil's retribution could be sweeping and severe, as one famous story will show. Let's delve into a few of Enlil's most important sagas, which illustrate the full range of his character and significance. One of the foundational myths about Enlil is the story of Enlil and Ninlil, a tale that combines romance, transgression, and the origins of several gods. It's a myth that ancient Sumerians might have told to explain the relationship between their moon god, their underworld gods, and Enlil's early life. It also reads almost like a divine courtship drama. The story is set in Nippur in a time before the creation of human beings, so the city is portrayed as a sort of heavenly town inhabited by gods alone. Young Enlil lives there, already a figure of importance, and Nippur is governed by divine laws and order. A beautiful young goddess named Ninlil catches Enlil's eye. Ninlil is the daughter of Nisaba, the goddess of writing and wisdom. Before Ninlil goes out to bathe in the Holy Canal, her mother gives her some very pragmatic advice. Do not let Enlil see you in the nude. Do not engage with the eager young god, or you may lose your virginity and face great consequences. Ninlil's mother likely knows Enlil's reputation, or simply fears the impulsiveness of youth, but love, or lust, will have its way. Ninlil ignores her mother's warning. She goes to the river to bathe, and there Enlil indeed spots her. Enlil is smitten by Ninlil's beauty gleaming in the water. The desire is mutual. In some interpretations, Ninlil wants Enlil as well. And the two embrace in the reeds. In this moment, Enlil seduces Ninlil, and they lie together. As a result, Ninlil becomes pregnant with a child. This child will be Nana, the moon god. While this union might seem consensual in the telling, it still breaks the protocols of the gods. perhaps because Enlil approached her without the formalities of marriage, or because it happened in a sacred space. The other gods in Nippur regard Enlil's act as a grave offense. Enlil is seized by the divine assembly and put on trial of sorts. The judgment: Enlil, having rendered himself ritually impure, is to be banished from the city and sent to the underworld for a time. In essence, the king of the gods is temporarily exiled for misconduct. Enlil, now carrying his child, is also exiled, perhaps to remove the scandal from Nippur. She chooses to follow Enlil's path, though at a distance, determined to stay with her beloved. As Enlil heads into the gloomy netherworld, he realizes Enlil is pursuing him. Here, Enlil's cleverness comes into play. He decides to hide from Enlil by disguising himself. On the road out of Nippur, Enlil encounters various gatekeepers and guardians of the underworld's approach. He instructs each one not to reveal his whereabouts if Enlil asks. Then Enlil uses his powers to shapeshift into the form of those very gatekeepers. When Enlil arrives at the first checkpoint, she meets a figure who is actually Enlil in disguise and asks if he's seen Enlil pass by. The disguised Enlil refuses to tell her, but as they talk, Enlil somehow offers herself to this stranger in exchange for information. The result? Enlil sleeps with Enlil again. However, he still does not reveal his identity or location. Enlil moves on. This scenario repeats itself multiple times. At each gate or station on the way to the underworld, Enlil, wearing a new disguise, beds Enlil, who is desperately seeking her husband, and each time he leaves her with another child conceived, but gives her no answer about Enlil's whereabouts. In total, through these clandestine encounters, 3 new deities are conceived. Nergal, a god of death and pestilence; Ninazu, a god of healing and also linked to the underworld; and Enbilulu, a god of canals and fertility. These 3 are all associated with the subterranean realm or with duties that can be carried out in the dark, hidden places, fitting for children begotten during an underworld exile. The myth neatly explains why these underworld deities exist. They are the offspring that Enlil left in the underworld, in a sense. Finally, the exile comes to an end. Enlil reveals himself, and he and Enlil are reunited properly. It appears that the reason Enlil did all this, impregnating Enlil in disguise, was to ensure that their first child, Nanna, the moon, could be born in heaven rather than be dragged down to the underworld. In some interpretations, the idea is that one soul had to stay in the underworld in Enlil's stead for him to return to the living realm. By creating 3 substitute deities, Nergal, Ninazu, Enbilulu, tied to the netherworld, Enlil effectively provided replacements and thus freed himself, Enlil and Nanna, from an underworld fate. It's a complex bit of divine maneuvering. Enlil broke the letter of the law to ultimately fulfill a larger purpose, a theme we'll see again. Crucially, the myth also foreshadows Enlil's later persona. Initially, he's a rule breaker for love, but in later myths, he becomes the enforcer of rules. It's as if the youthful Enlil needed to experience the reckless pursuit of desire firsthand. Later, as the seasoned king of the gods, he would understand the consequences of unchecked impulses and thus uphold order more firmly. Another famous tale involving Enlil displays a different aspect of his significance, his role as the custodian of divine power and order. This is the myth of the Anzu bird and the Tablet of Destinies. It's a story of theft and heroism that highlights how essential Enlil's authority was, so much so that when it was stolen, the universe spiraled toward chaos. Enlil, as mentioned, possessed the Tablets of Destiny, engraved tablets that legitimize the rule of the supreme god and contain the decrees of fate for all things. To hold these tablets is to hold the reins of kingship over heaven and earth. In the Babylonian version of the tale, Enlil is firmly established as the king of the gods. Enter Anzu, sometimes depicted as a massive lion-headed eagle or thunderbird, a symbol of storms and a personification of uncontrolled destructive forces. Anzu is described as a god, or demon, of chaos and evil, and he covets Enlil's power. One day, the myth relates, Anzu hatches a plan. He watches Enlil carefully, waiting for the right moment. Enlil rises each dawn, and like a proper Sumerian lord, performs his morning bathing ritual. On the fateful morning, Enlil has removed his crown and set aside the tablets of destiny while he washes his face with pure water. In that unguarded moment, Anzu strikes. He snatches the tablets and soars off into the sky, heading for the distant mountains. In seconds, Enlil's symbol of authority is gone, stolen by a traitor from within his own household. The theft has immediate dire consequences. With the tablets in enemy claws, Enlil's rulership is suspended. Indeed, if the one who holds the tablets can command fate, then Anzu having them throws the cosmic hierarchy into disarray. Anzu could, in theory, usurp Enlil's place and unwrite destiny as he pleased, a terrifying prospect to the gods. The great god Anu calls an emergency council. He urges the gods to pursue Anzu and retrieve the tablets, but initially no one dares. Facing the empowered Anzu is too frightening. With the tablets, Anzu might be unbeatable. This detail underscores how much the other gods relied on Enlil's leadership. Without him in command, they were hesitant and leaderless. Finally, a champion steps forward. It is Ninurta, Enlil's loyal son and warrior, who accepts the mission. The hero engages Anzu in combat. After an intense battle of flying arrows and raging winds, the champion defeats Anzu and takes back the tablets of destiny. Order is restored. The hero returns the tablets to Enlil's grateful hands. Throughout the ordeal, Enlil himself, interestingly, takes a bit of a passive role. He's the wronged king awaiting the return of his regalia. But the successful outcome reaffirms a crucial point. Enlil is the legitimate king of the gods, confirmed by the will of Anu and the triumph of his appointed champion. The myth explicitly emphasizes that Enlil's rule is authorized by Anu and by the possession of the tablets. In other words, Enlil's authority is not just personal might, it's a sacred trust from the highest heavens. Enlil's mythology, while not as rich in number of tales as some other deities, includes a few more noteworthy deeds and attributes. Creator of the hoe. A humble but significant Sumerian poem credits Enlil with the invention of the hoe, a tool of agriculture. In this mythic poem, Enlil fashions the hoe and uses it to break the hard earth, separating heaven and earth and preparing the ground for crops and cities. By this act, Enlil effectively inaugurates the age of agriculture, enabling humans to build civilization. The poem joyously describes Enlil's hoe, adorned with silver and lapis lazuli, and how Enlil, the good farmer of the gods, uses it to create life-sustaining order from primeval chaos. This story highlights Enlil's role as a civilizer, not just a destroyer. While the flood myth shows him tearing the world down, the hoe myth shows him building it up. The Mesopotamians thus remembered Enlil each time they tilled soil. Even the simplest farm tool carried a sacred significance as Enlil's gift, founder of cities and order. In various hymns, Enlil is lauded as the one who establishes cities, boundaries, and prosperity. He was called the father of the black-headed people, black-headed being a nickname for the Sumerians, and credited with laying the foundations of stable society. On Sumerian composition, Enlil in the Ekur describes how Enlil set in place the fundamental ordinances for the world and made the seed to sprout in the land. This aligns with the mythic theme that Enlil separated heaven and earth to create the inhabited world. In essence, Enlil was not only king, but also the architect of the earthly realm as a habitable, organized space. Warfare and protection. Although Enlil was not primarily a war god, His command decided battles. Kings would pray to Enlil for victory. If an enemy city was to be defeated, it was said that Enlil has withdrawn the city's destiny, allowing it to fall. Conversely, a city under Enlil's favour was considered unconquerable. Enlil's protective aspect is evident in how fervently cities like Nippur, Kish, and later Babylon sought to keep his cult. It meant divine sanction of their dominion. When invaders sacked Nippur in 1230 BC and desecrated Eker, people believed Enlil's anger would surely befall those perpetrators. Indeed, the Elamites who did that were later defeated, and Enlil's temple was restored by subsequent kings, signifying his enduring protective justice. If one story made Enlil infamous in Mesopotamian lore, it is the tale of the Great Flood. We already covered this story in the episode on Enki, but it might be good to reflect on Enlil's role now that we know more about him. The younger gods were tired of labouring to maintain the world, so Enki and the mother goddess fashioned humans to do the work. Thus, humans spread and did all the work, farming, digging canals, and providing worship to the gods. This initially pleased Enlil and the pantheon. Over time, however, the human population exploded. The new race turned out to be exceptionally fertile and energetic, filling the earth in a few centuries. With so many people, the clamour of human activity grew louder and louder, cities bustling, farmers clearing fields, celebrations, possibly even wars. To the gods who had once enjoyed peace and quiet, the noise became intolerable. The texts specifically say that the noise of humans kept Enlil awake at night. The chief god could not sleep due to the racket of mortals. Enlil decided something had to be done about this chaotic, ever-growing humanity. His first solution was not immediately genocide, however. In the Atrahasis epic, Enlil attempts gradual population control by sending calamities to reduce the humans. He tries a series of escalating disasters, hoping to cull the human population and silence their noise. Drought. Enlil calls for the rain to cease. The skies dry up, and a searing drought bakes the land. Rivers shrink, crops wither, and people starve. Many humans die, and the survivors suffer greatly. But the humans do not go extinct. They cry out to Enki, the god who helped create them, for help. Enki, ever compassionate to his creatures, secretly teaches them how to appease the god of rain and end the drought. Gradually water returns and humanity recovers, still numerous. Pestilence. Determined to thin out mankind, Enlil next unleashes a plague upon the earth. A disease sweeps through the populations. Once again, humans are in agony and die in droves. But once again, Enki provides counsel. He instructs the humans on rites to placate Namtar, the demon of plague, ending the epidemic. Humanity, scarred but resilient, bounces back. Famine. Frustrated that neither drought nor pestilence did the job, Enlil then sends a famine. Perhaps he causes crops to fail or blight to strike. Hunger ravages the land. Parents watch their children starve. Again, the humans turn to Enki in desperation. The crafty god tells them how to survive the famine by worshipping the grain goddess, and the people persist. Each time Enlil believes he will hear silence, life rebounds noisier than before. By now, Enlil is furious and perplexed. Somehow, every time he tries to impose a deadly check on humanity, the humans not only survive but come back stronger. He likely suspects that his half-brother Enki has been undermining these measures. Enlil convenes the council of the gods. He has decided on a final solution: a great flood. This will be no mere localized disaster. He envisions a sweeping deluge to wipe the slate clean entirely. Water, after all, is one force even Enki cannot fully control when unleashed in fury. The assembly of gods, swayed by Enlil's resolve, and perhaps tired of the noise themselves, agrees to the plan. Importantly, they also swear an oath not to warn any human about the coming cataclysm. Enlil is adamant that this time there should be no escape. Even Enki is bound by this oath, under pressure from his peers. So Enlil sets the plan in motion. The texts describe how the floodgates of heaven were opened and underground waters rose in unison, a colossal outpouring of water from above and below. For 7 days and 7 nights, in many versions, the storm raged. A monstrous black cloud turned day into night. Lightning and thunder battered the earth. Winds howled, driving torrential rain that grew into walls of water. Rivers overflowed, their banks invisible under a rolling ocean that consumed fields and cities. Humanity was utterly unprepared. One man, however, had a boat. In secret defiance of Enlil's edict, the clever Enki had found a loophole. Though he couldn't tell a human about the flood directly, he whispered the secret to the walls of a reed hut, knowing a righteous man would overhear. This man is known as Utnapishtim. We briefly saw him in the Gilgamesh epic already. Enki provided him detailed instructions to build a great ark, sealed with pitch, with enough room for his family and animals of every kind to survive. When the flood finally subsided, the world was a wasteland. Atrahasis opened a hatch to look upon the endless waters turned to mire. Eventually the hero released a dove, a swallow and a raven to test if any dry land remained. Finding that the waters were receding, the survivor emerged and immediately offered a sacrifice to the gods, a huge offering of incense and animal meat, grateful for deliverance. Up in heaven, Enlil and the gods smell the sweet savour of the sacrifice, the aroma of worship from the earth, something they hadn't smelled since the flood began, draws the gods like hungry flies. They gather around the little altar that Atrahasis built on the mountain, suddenly filled with joy and relief that at least one human is left to honour them. But Enlil's reaction is not so joyful at first. He is furious. Somehow his decree was flouted. A mortal survived his annihilating flood. Enki now admits that he helped Atrahasis, but he presents a compelling argument. Was it right to exterminate the innocent along with the guilty? Enki points out that Atrahasis was a righteous man, a wise servant of the gods who did nothing to deserve such a fate. Enlil's blanket decision to destroy all humans was disproportionate. Enki likely also reminds Enlil that it was he himself who helped create humans. Would Enlil make that sacred act of creation meaningless by undoing it completely? The assembly of gods listens, and Enlil's anger gradually cools. As the gods smell the offering, Enlil's heart is softened. The chief god comes to a new understanding. The wholesale destruction of humanity was a mistake. Enlil even blesses the survivor for his piety, realizing that this human alone upheld the gods' worship when all others perished. Enlil then grants Atrahasis immortality, an honor usually reserved for gods. But he makes another decision. From now on, humans will have built-in limitations to keep their population and behavior in check. Enlil decrees measures that the texts list out: shorter lifespans, no more near immortality for humans as in antediluvian times, natural infant mortality, and institutionalized celibacy for certain priestesses, meaning not everyone will bear children. These are seen as divinely instituted controls on human proliferation and hubris. Life for humanity will be harder. Death, disease, and toil will be constants. But never again will the gods resort to annihilation. Legacy and conclusion. The stern ruler of heaven and earth. So, who was Enlil really? And why does he still fascinate us? In many ways, Enlil represents the concept of supreme authority in divine form. He is the archetype of the Sky Father or Storm King that we see echoed in later cultures, like Zeus in Greece, or to some extent Yahweh in the Hebrew tradition. Enlil embodied the paradox of absolute power. He could be both the protector and the destroyer. On one hand, he was the gracious father who watches over humanity and cares for their well-being, ensuring the sun would rise, the rains would fall, and just kings would rule. On the other hand, he was a strict disciplinarian who would not hesitate to punish mankind's transgressions or oversteps. This dynamic made Enlil a somewhat ambivalent figure in Mesopotamian lore, deeply respected, often feared, but also ultimately indispensable. Enlil's stories illustrate that order must be balanced with compassion. We saw how his initial heavy-handed approach, sending the flood, was checked by Enki's empathy, resulting in a more measured solution. In that sense, Enlil's narrative conveys an early understanding that justice without mercy can lead to catastrophe, and even the highest authority benefits from wise counsel. Enlil's own evolution from impulsive youth, with Ninlil, to responsible patriarch underscores a moral growth. He came to value the preservation of life and the rules of fairness, not just the enforcement of his will. For the Mesopotamians, Enlil was for millennia the undisputed high god, the one without whom civilization could not exist. It is telling that even when Babylon's theology elevated Marduk as supreme, they did so by essentially merging him with Enlil's persona. Assyrian kings similarly identified their god Ashur with Enlil's attributes. In other words, Enlil's legacy lived on. The very idea of a chief deity who ordains kings and controls fate in the Near East is an inheritance from Enlil's cult. Even after Nippur's political decline, Enlil's temples remained active and his name invoked, showing how ingrained he was in cultural memory. In a broader sense, Enlil fascinates us today because he personifies a fundamental force in human society: the need for law, order, and leadership, tempered by wisdom. His raw might was the sky's fury, yet his approval meant gentle rains and prosperity. People living under unpredictable floods and storms, under the rise and fall of kings, naturally imagined those powers as a personality. And that personality was Enlil. Through him, they grappled with questions of authority and morality. When is punishment justified? Can mercy override law? How do we appease power and yet deserve compassion? These questions are still with us, which makes Enlil's ancient saga feel surprisingly relevant. In sum, Enlil was not a simple deity of wind. He was the very breath of the world's order, the invisible structure holding everything up. He was the storm that could devastate and the air that always sustains. His stern face reflected the truth that nature and fate can be harsh, but his eventual yielding showed that benevolence is divine as well. To the Sumerians, Enlil's name evoked the awe one feels before a towering mountain or a thunderous sky. It demanded respect, but it also gave comfort to think that a great fatherly power was in charge, maintaining the cosmos on their behalf. That was Enlil, god of wind, of storms, of decrees, king of the gods, dispenser of destinies, guardian of civilization's laws, a deity who could unleash a flood to scour the earth, yet later decree that life should continue under just limits. Thousands of years later, Enlil's stories still speak to us about the nature of power and responsibility. They remind us that even the mightiest ruler must listen to wisdom and temper judgment with mercy. And they capture a timeless human hope that after the storm there will be peace, and after wrath, reconciliation. Join us next time on Myths and Sagas as we journey to another corner of the ancient world and uncover the saga of another iconic figure. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the saga of Enlil and the mythic lore of Mesopotamia, please like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more tales from the ages.